Yeah, Gormagut, Ceann Corla. Tarnished, I was going to call you Taoiseach, it's very confusing around here, isn't it? Tarnished, the news that Panda are hiking up their bin charges will be no surprise to customers who've had to pay hefty bin charges in this country since 2003, roughly, when the move to bring in bin charges was imposed. That was 20 years ago. Myself and about 27 activists went to prison over protests to stop bin charges, not because we're miserable and don't want to pay our way in society, but because we predicted at the time, quite rightly, that it would be a disaster that would lead to the privatisation of waste collection services up and down the country, and that privatisation would in turn be a disaster for workers, for the environment and for the communities which they're supposed to serve. Now, the news that Panda are going to charge for organic waste is an absolute contradiction in terms of what we've been told by the state, by the Department of the Environment at the time and now, was the purpose of encouraging people to recycle. Was the reason why bin charges were brought in. And in that process of recycling, they're now going to be charged for the organic waste, much of which has been dumped for decades at the back of where I live on Kylemore Avenue in a facility Thornton's owned. And in the last year or so, they've moved the organic waste out of Ballyfermot under pressure from the local community and the constant campaigning to the Environmental Protection Agency that we've had to do. It's been moved out of there, it's prevented the odours and the inconvenience and the toxic air that it has spread through Ballyfermot for many decades. All that aside, we now have a company that was bought over for 1.4 billion from Eamon Waters of Bow Park Utilities by an Australian infrastructure fund. An Australian infrastructure fund is raising bin charges to ordinary consumers by €100 a year, more or less, for 26 lifts. And at the same time, what we're witnessing in terms of the privatisation of the service, and anybody who lives in a working class estate particularly will know this, every day of the week, not once a week, but every day of the week, dirty, large diesel-run trucks run up and down estates because of competition. Either people are going to Thornton's, or they're going to Panda, or they're going to City Bin. There are a plethora of waste management companies, most of them registered offshore, so that their profits are not up for scrutiny. We do have a measure of a lot of their profits, and by God are their profits rising. I'll read out some of them later on, but their profits are rising astronomically. Even in this cost of living crisis, they're gaining and people are losing out. So is it not time now, Taoiseach, or Tánaiste Gumalesh Gael, that this state called for the renationalisation, the remunicipalisation of the waste management services throughout the country? It's been a disaster for the environment, for workers, for ordinary people who have to pay the charges, and it's time to reverse that and do the right thing for all of the above mentioned.
Thank you, Deputy Tánaiste.
Yeah, I would first of all say to the Deputy that apart from ideology or whatever, I think we need to analyse what has happened in terms of waste in this country over the 20 years. And you're saying you opposed what transpired in 2003. I was reading recently Mark Henry's book on Ireland at 100 Fact. And we've made extraordinary progress, actually, in terms of recycling, in terms of reducing our dependency on landfill, and in terms of how we manage waste. So actually, irrespective of whether it's private, public or whatever, the story around waste in Ireland has been one of continuous progress over the last 2 decades. Of that, there's no doubt in terms of, and I know this because I led campaigns to close landfills. And the landfill that I was anxious to close is now an amenity park, the Tramore Valley Park in Cork City. It was a horrible dump at one stage. And in fact, there was proposals to produce another landfill to replace it. That alternative landfill never got developed. Why? Because there was no need. Because of the efforts of household recycling. And that needs to be acknowledged in the first instance. And before we commit ourselves to wholesale renationalisation of the service, I do accept the point that at times, because of the competition that you've spoken about, you can have situations in housing estates where you have a proliferation of different companies going through housing estates. I acknowledge that point. And there's always room in terms of regulating markets and so on to deal with that. But I think the fundamental objective has to be to reduce and to minimise waste, and then to ensure it's recycled and so forth. And as you know, back in mid-2017, the then government decided to phase out flat rate fees for household waste collection. Collection companies are required to charge fees which incentivise households to minimise waste and to segregate their recyclable and organic waste from residual waste. And in the interest of encouraging further waste prevention and greater recycling, flat rate fees for curbside household waste collection were phased out again over that period. And the price monitoring group for household waste collection have monitored the market up to the end of 2020 and found that prices in the market were broadly stable, and data from the group showed that offerings in the market had coalesced around 8 common price plans, with the most common being service charge with a weight allowance plus excess charges above that particular allowance. There is no requirement for a collector to charge fees in the organic bin, but of course it's open to companies to decide how to structure their pricing plans. And again, we'll keep the situation under review. We, from an overall government perspective, have done a lot to try and assist people in respect of cost of living more generally. And we do monitor charges across the economy.
Right, thank you,
and we've reduced quite a substantial amount of charges across the economy, particularly public service charges in health and in other areas and in education over the last 12 months.
Deputy Smith.
Part of your statement has made my case for me, that if people are incentivised to recycle, they separate their organic waste and their paper and plastic and their bottles and pay for their black bin waste, and they don't pay for the recycling, then they're incentivised. That incentive is now being taken from them by this increase announced by Panda, followed by another increase announced by Citybin, and no doubt, given the competitive nature of this market that was designed to be competitive by previous government, the Fianna Fáil government, I understand, that this market will increase the prices for everybody to recycle. So you remove the incentive. And this is the craziness of companies which are making vast profits, most of which are now going to fund infrastructure in Australia. This is the biggest waste management company in the country, and Panda's profits, now owned by an Australian infrastructure company, will help Australia build infrastructure. It does nothing for us here except put more hefty bin charges on people and disincentivise them to recycle. I agree with you about landfill. We're burning our waste out in Poolbeg. We have an incinerator now that we didn't have before, and we're still exporting a huge amount of waste, much of it toxic waste. Now, if the privatisation of waste hasn't led to that, what has? We need to take it back into public ownership, control it, and stop it being the mode of profit for these greedy companies. The profits are going through the roof. Thornton's 5.7 million pre-tax profits last year, and as I said earlier on, most of them are offshore. Panda's profits have been enormous, but their prices are going up. You haven't answered that.
Deputy.
I'd make a general point, Deputy, in response to, we have many Irish companies providing services all over the world. Wastewater, so you can not all like Deputy Bríd Barrett, but we do. No, we do. Like, our economy depends. Sorry.
Please.
We have Irish companies who provide services all over the world, wastewater treatment, you name it, high technology solutions. That's what Ireland does today. Talk to Enterprise Ireland and the number of client companies they have who export all over the world, to Australia, to Canada, their services. That's what creates jobs in Ireland. Your model of the economy, in my view, would damage our model, basically, which produces full employment.
That is not the argument here.
Deputy.
You raised the argument about a company because it's international, it's problematic.
My argument. What are you going to do? You're disincentivising people by allowing this happen.
It's also a consistent thread, which I'm not going to take anymore. It needs to be challenged. This country has full employment. The enterprise model we have developed over the last 30 years has worked, broadly speaking. And you have been against it all of the time. And I'm entitled to challenge your fundamental premise, which Deputy Bríd Barrett shares. You don't have a monopoly of wisdom on how economies get managed. Nobody does. But I'm sure one thing, we have a small, open economy in this country. And if we're going to take a protectionist view, that no foreign company can provide any service in this country, that would destroy the Irish economic model. is what we're basically saying is no other country in the world should tolerate Irish companies providing good services and high quality services elsewhere.
Disincentivise people is wise, is it?
Deputy Smith,
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Will you please, please.